So this is the self and peer evaluation rubric that I use in Science Ed 201, and actually the other Science Ed classes I teach as well. And I've also used it in the ACE seminar class, and I really like it because it defines participation in a systematic and nuanced way that kind of goes beyond me just trying to remember how much people talked in the whiteboard discussions and how engaged they were in their small groups. It's kind of hard to define. So I like this rubric because it helps you define it. I'm not going to read this to you, but what I will discuss is how I use it. On the back of this, or on the second page of this, are two questions that I have students answer after they first indicate their own idea of how their participation has gone using this rubric, and I will assign this activity after every quiz in the class. So they'll do this 3 times because I also tend to reorganize groups after every quiz as well. So the first step is for them to do their self-evaluation and to circle the cells in each row that they think correspond to them. And then on the back are 2 questions that have them reflect upon their own participation and the norms of the class. So number 2 has them write a goal for a group work, and it still says next chapter, I have realized, and that's an artifact from the old PET curriculum, which would probably need to change. But it basically just has them describe one personal goal for their work with their new group. And so when I reorganize them after a quiz, they can then use their response to that question to discuss with their group their next group work goal. And I usually provide time for that right after reorganizing them into their new groups, and have them have a quick small group discussion about their goals for participation with their new groups. And then this number 3 here has them discuss one of the class norms, which, by the way, I've started to post on my Canvas homepage for all of my classes that I teach, so it's the first thing that they see when they go to Canvas. But they pick a class norm and they describe how well it's going in the class, and that's a good way to surface any broader issues that are happening in the class with respect to the norms, to see if there needs to be a whole class discussion around that. So it's a nice way to use the student feedback to open those discussions, which can sometimes be difficult to do. If they are bringing the issues up, then it's easier than the instructor. And so that's why I like this question. And then finally, they will evaluate their own group members' engagement in the class using the participation rubric. And these numbers here correspond to the 5 rows on the participation rubric on the previous page. So basically, they would write a group member's name, and then they'd rate their participation like so, and go through that for all of their other group members. And then down here is where they have the option of writing to me any information that they would like to share about their group dynamics. And so that is something that not everybody does. It's optional and it's confidential. But it does surface issues that I can then be cognizant of when working with the students in their new groups. And it also sometimes will help me figure out who to pair them with next. So this is a 3-page document, and the first 2 pages are front and back of one piece of paper. This peer evaluation part of it is stapled to that first page. And so what I do is, when I'm done processing all of this data, which I'll show you what I do with it, I will take that back page off and shred it. So this page that we're looking at right now gets shredded, and then I will hand back the first 2 pages back to the students with some feedback, and I'll show you what I do with that. So I'm going to switch over to Excel because what I do, I want to show you what I do with these peer and self-evaluations. So here's the Excel spreadsheet that I use to keep track of the various data points that I have with this peer and self-evaluation rubric. What I do is I will do my own rating before I see anything that they have written about themselves or their peers. So I do this before I collect their peer and self-evaluations from them. And so this row here is my assessment of their participation so far in the class with the particular group that they've been in. And I will do that again before I collect their peer and self-evaluations. And I usually check in with the TA too. So I'll give them, I'll take a stab myself, and then I'll send it to my TA, and my TA will give me input. And that's been really valuable because sometimes the TA will see something that I don't. And so I like to get multiple perspectives on that. And I often will change things in response to that. And then the student, then I go through, once I have that down, then I'll go through their self-and-peer evaluations. I have a row for their own self-evaluation there, and then I have rows for the other members of their group. In 204, sometimes I have groups of 4, and so, I just add extra rows. So, but for 201, they're usually in groups of 3, and so that generates 4 data points, 1 from me, 1 from themselves, and 2 from their group members. And what I usually do with that is, grade-wise, is that I will drop in each column here, I will either drop the lowest score or the lowest and the highest. I think last time I did this, I dropped just the lowest the first time they did the peer and self-evaluation. Because I really wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt and have this be a positive experience. And then the second and third times I dropped the highest and the lowest because I didn't want them to overrate themselves or each other. And so then what I do is after dropping the highest and the lowest score, I'll do an average score in this yellow line here that is basically, I could do 3.3 or 3.6 depending on where the scores average out, but I basically round to the nearest 0.5, just makes it simpler. And then I just add them all up in this column here. And so then what I will do is, in terms of feedback to the students, is I will put these scores here in the yellow line back on their self and peer evaluation form. So this one was, looks like this one was 4, 3.5, 4, 3.5, and 3.5. So I'll just kind of write that on there like this. I'll give them their score, which was 18.5 out of 20. And I tell them, I'm very transparent with them about the fact that I do drop either the lowest or the lowest and the highest score and why I do that. And then I'll write my feedback here, usually starting with some positive feedback and then things to work on. And sometimes I'll incorporate my responses to their own personal goal that they write on the second page. And that's what they get back. Now, some people use this self and peer evaluation just for formative feedback and don't use it to assign grades. I definitely can see arguments for doing that. I feel like I have a hard time assigning participation grades in an authentic and nuanced way without doing it this way. Because as I said before, it's then becomes up to me and how I am observing the students, and the students will see a lot of things that I don't, and experience a lot of things that I don't. And so I really like to take their feedback into account in a meaningful way. But if somebody holds a grudge or really didn't like a person and gives them low scores, those scores would be thrown out. So I kind of like the system of throwing out the lowest and sometimes the highest scores as well. I haven't had much negative feedback about using self and peer evaluations in this way. I've had maybe one thing on a student evaluation over, say, 4-ish years of using this, and one discussion with a student after class, but that was mostly about their own group dynamics and not about this as a method of evaluating them. So I'm still going to use it. I like it. It's systematic. It takes the burden off of just me observing. And so that's how I do the peer and self evaluations.